Shadow Group by Mark Alexander. Read by Phil Daniels.
It was this news item I read this morning in the Hollywood Reporter that took me back to the time when me and the lads did a gig in Furbridge-on-Sea. Hardly anyone had heard of the Executioners then, which tells you how long ago it was. I mean, I'm not one to blow my own trumpet. I'm a lead guitarist. Get the joke? But sales prove that the three big groups in the history of pop are the Beatles, the Stones, and the Executioners. Look at the number of platinum discs we've got to prove it. And if it wasn't true, I wouldn't be sitting by the pool of $1 million mansion in Hollywood with a restored Vega in the drive, and the group wouldn't have its own Learjet. Know what I mean? Yeah, I guess we done all right out of the pop world. Mind you, it was a bit of a drag to find out that Wolfbane had edged our latest single down to number 2 in the charts after only a couple of weeks. Not that we need to worry too much about that, but like I say, it was this news item which took me back to Furbridge-on-Sea, where we'd been booked to do a gig in the Opera House. Then it was a grim old place, all peeling guilt and disinfectant smell. We got the gear out of the old Ford Transit and set it up on stage, and we were sitting in a crummy dressing room waiting for the kids to come. Praying for the kids to come. Like I said, we weren't well known then because although we'd had a single out, we hadn't been able to afford to make a video. Understand? Anyway, there we are shivering in this crummy dressing room when there's a sort of timid knock on the door and this geezer shuffles in. "Sorry, Wally, we don't do autographs until after the show," says Jack Ladd, our lead singer. He was the witty one, and we fell about at the look on this geezer's face as he tried to explain that he didn't want our autographs. Age-wise, he was pushing it. Into the late 20s, I'd say. And thin and haggard. I reckon he was one of those stage door creeps after a handout. You know, let me give you a hand with the gear, and hope to be bung a few quid. In those days, any bunging was for ourselves, because we were always skint. Sometimes I like to remember them days when I'm setting out from Del Rey in my luxury motor yacht. Makes me enjoy it more. Getting back to this geezer, old Jack asks him what does he want, and he says something very strange. He says, "I've come to give you a warning." "You mean the Red Brigade is going to kidnap us?" says Jack, laughing. "What luck. That would rate us a big story in the NME." "I'm serious," says this geezer, looking all offended like. "The stage in this theatre is haunted." There's a bit of silence, because that was the last thing we expected to hear. Then our synth player, Flash Rocker, Albert Rocks before he joined us, says, "I've heard about you. You're the nut they call the Phantom of the Opera because you hang around here all the time." "It's not me that's the Phantom," this geezer says in a quiet voice. "I'm Tony Smith." We look blank. "You've never heard of Tony and Steve?" he asks, sort of hopeful. Well, we all said no. He looked a bit sad. "We only had a couple of singles out before we come here," he said. "We were a rock and roll duo. My mate Steve played the drums and I was on guitar, and we both vocalised numbers I wrote." "Oh yeah," says Jack Ladd, thinking this old-timer is about to start handing out demo tapes. "That rock stuff is dead. We aren't looking for golden oldies." Steve and I were the first to perform rock and roll here. Tony goes on as though he's not heard what Jack said. "Until then, we'd just done the clubs, but this was an important date for us. And when we went out there, we gave it everything we'd got. And the kids loved us. They started dancing in the aisles, and it was great. I mean, really great. But halfway through, I noticed something strange. At first, it seemed like there were shadows on the stage, and I just thought it was the spots, making my eyes go funny, the way they do. You ought to know with all your light effects. And then it seemed that the shadows were taking on some sort of shape. I glanced at Steve, who was going berserk behind his drum kit, and I saw he was looking round a bit worried. Anyway, we kept rocking on, and the shadows got more and more shape to them. And soon, and I swear this is true, there was another group, a group of shadow people, on stage with us. His words sounded so solemn-like that for once Jack Ladd didn't make a comic remark. "You mean you were surrounded by ghosts? A ghost group?" I said. He nodded. They didn't seem to take any notice of us. They were in the middle of a performance, and they were really giving out, but we couldn't hear anything. I tell you, it was pretty hard to keep playing with that going on around us. So what happened? After a few minutes, they faded away. Even though I was under the lights and jumping around, I felt as cold as ice, and I was shivering when we came off. I could see that Steve was in a bad way too. "You see them?" I asked as we came back into the dressing room. "This very room it was." "Yeah," said Steve. "I'll never play this place again." "What were they?" I didn't have time to answer because the recording manager from Galaxy Records whistled in with a contract. Tony had our attention now. This was the sort of stuff we liked to hear. He'd been talent spotting and liked our sound, and we were so hipped we forgot all about the shadows on the stage. "I don't remember you on Galaxy," said Jack Ladd. "I collected a lot of Galaxies when I was a kid." "We never made a recording," said Tony. "We lived here in Furbridge, and that night, when Steve was going home on his motorbike, he went into a skid. They found him dead on the side of the road in the morning." "And you reckon the ghosts were sort of a warning?" I asked. "Perhaps," Tony replied. "I don't know. But I try and warn any groups coming here that the stage is haunted. It's the least I can do." "Hang about," said Jack. "You said you were the first to play rock and roll here." "That's right," said Tony. "It had been posh music and ballet up till then. We were the first to bring in a crowd for years." "Then where did these ghosts of yours come from? I mean, you go to a haunted castle and there'll be ghostly nights and such, but there can't have been any rock groups here to come back from the dead. Are you having us on?" "No, I'm not," said Tony. "I had to give you the warning, but now I'll be on my way. Personally, I wouldn't play on that stage for an oil well. If you go on, it's up to you, okay?" And with that, he walked out. We sat without talking for a bit, and then Jack Ladd said, "He's a nutter, a raving nutter. If there hadn't been any groups playing here before him and his mate, it would be impossible for a phantom rock band to come back." Cool. For a moment he had me going. A few minutes later, we were on stage belting it out to a packed house. It was the holiday season, and there must have been a lot of bored kids in Furbridge-on-Sea that night. The place really began to lift off, and I was waiting for the plaster cherubs to come bombing down from the ceiling. It was great, but, well, I still don't really know what happened that night. We went in for some pretty fantastic light effects in those days, and, with the strobes flashing, it was easy for your eyesight to go weird. I mean, when you're up there with lights battering you, and the noise from the amplifiers blasting the top of your skull off, and smoke swirling round you, and the kids out front screaming, it's pretty hard to know what's going on. But, okay. I did begin to imagine that there were some funny sorts of shadows round me. At first I told myself that it was our own shadows being thrown on the smoke effect. But after a while, I knew I was kidding myself. Those shadows had a life of their own. They were playing different instruments to us. And there were more of them. Afterwards we tried to tell each other that it was in our minds because of what that geezer Tony had told us. Anyway, next day we had more to worry about than shadows. Early in the morning, Jack Ladd went for a before-breakfast swim, ignoring the fact that the red flags were up. Some hours later his body was washed up on the shingle, and the coppers said he must have been caught in the undertow. We were shattered. But shattered. I mean, there was some great publicity in the music mags and the Sun and the Star. But that wasn't much good, with our lead vocalist gone to the great pop festival in the sky. We had bookings along the coast, and it looked like we would have to cancel. What about that geezer Tony? I said. He used to be in the business. But that was years ago, said our drummer Paul Ronald. He's an old rock and roller. It doesn't matter if he's an old skiffler, I said, as long as he can hold a microphone in front of his face. Well, you know the story. Who doesn't? We hunted for Tony Smith and finally found him behind the counter of a cut-price record shop and persuaded him to come and have a tryout. He was good. And once he'd done a few rehearsals with us, he was more than good. And although he looked like a scarecrow in those days, he had one of those powerhouse voices that would have made poor old Jack Ladd go green with envy. So we were able to keep our engagements. And when we started doing the numbers that Tony wrote specially for us, we were on our way. He added a magic ingredient that everybody wanted. And of course he still does. A lot of groups have copied us, and they've never managed to get our sound. With success piling on success, I haven't thought about that night in Furbridge-on-Sea for a long time. I mean, when you're climbing the charts, you're looking forward all the time, and the past is the past. Or it was until this morning. I'd come out for breakfast by the pool. You know, what I really dig about life in California is having breakfast by the pool. When the cordless blower bleeps, and it's Paul Ronald ringing from his ranch. Take a look in the Hollywood Reporter, he says, and hangs up. So I did, and there on the front page is a headline, British Pop Concert Disaster. Let me read you the story. All the members of Wolfbane, the group which dramatically ousted the Executioners from #1 in the US and British charts this week, were killed in a bizarre accident while giving a live concert at the British resort town of Furbridge-on-Sea last night. Due to some still undisclosed electrical fault in their equipment, the entire group were fatally electrocuted halfway through their performance. Tough luck on Wolfbane, but the Executioners go on. And at least it means we'll soon be back at #1. And it does explain something about those shadows, OK, ghosts, on the stage of the old Opera House. Like that, phantoms don't only come from the past, they can come back from the future. Know what I mean?